the taxation in Kenya is broadly categorized into two. You have direct taxes and indirect taxes. Those are the domestic taxes in Kenya. Now, direct taxes are mainly taxes on your income, which you pay out of your income, either as a resident, non-resident, but mainly for people living in the diaspora, that is tax on the income that they would accrue or derive in Kenya. Now, indirect taxes are mainly taxes that you pay on goods that you purchase. For example, if someone living in the diaspora is importing certain goods, then they would be expected, of course, to pay importation VAT, or if you're purchasing goods in Kenya, then there are certain taxes that would apply, like VAT or excise duty. So for purposes of direct taxes, which are really more peculiar for people living in the diaspora, the Kenyan taxation framework operates on accrual or derivation principle. So as long as you're deriving any income from Kenya or accruing any income from Kenya, whether you're resident or non-resident, you're required to pay taxes. So the key question is then, if you're a non-resident, how do you pay the tax? Or if you're resident and you're not living in Kenya, how do you pay the tax? So for Kenyans in the diaspora, this is a very relevant conversation for them, because if you accrue income from Kenya, either from business or you have rental property, then you're expected to pay taxes in Kenya because you have accrued or derived income in Kenya. And this is really not different from any other person who would accrue or derive income in Kenya. So for persons in the diaspora, there would be a number of ways in which then they can be able to pay these taxes. One, if you accrue or derive income in Kenya, but you don't have residency in Kenya, then the taxation in Kenya follows what we call a withholding tax regime. So if you receive, for example, you've invested in bonds, treasury bills, or you have shares in Kenya, then you would be expected to pay taxes in Kenya through a withholding tax system. And this is similar to anyone else, whether you're resident or non-resident. If you accrue or derive income in Kenya, then you're expected to pay what we call withholding taxes. So the withholding tax rates would be varying depending on the nature of income, and I think those are some of the things that we constantly post on our website on what are some of the rates that are applicable for these incomes. So that is the withholding tax regime. Now, if you have a business in Kenya and you're someone living in the diaspora, it is then expected that you will have registered your business in Kenya, you'll have a PIN in Kenya, and you will therefore file your return or pay taxes based on the various tax obligations or the various payment dates that are provided for in law. So the peculiar issue when it comes to people in the diaspora is what we call employment income. And employment income is one area that we have faced a lot of questions on whether then someone in the diaspora would end up being taxed 2 times on their income. The Kenyan law provides that if you're a Kenyan resident and you earn employment income both in Kenya and your worldwide employment income, then there is a requirement in Kenya for you to pay taxes on your worldwide employment income for someone who is deemed to be resident. So the question then that I would be asked maybe is then what would make me become a tax resident in Kenya? And our laws are very clear and simplified in such a way that you become a resident in Kenya, tax resident in Kenya, if you have a home in Kenya. And where you have a home in Kenya, you come to Kenya for any one day in that year of income, then you're deemed to be tax resident for tax purposes, meaning that person will be required to declare both their employment income in Kenya and worldwide employment income. So if you're someone in the diaspora and you're earning income, say in your country where you're residing currently, it is expected that you will file your return in Kenya, declare your employment income that you've earned outside Kenya, and then pay taxes in Kenya. Now, that is someone who has a permanent home. if you don't have a permanent home in Kenya, but you are in Kenya for an average of 183 days in a particular year of income, you're also deemed to be tax resident and therefore required to also pay tax on your worldwide employment income. Or if you have an average of 122 days in the last 3 preceding years, you've been in Kenya for an average of 122 days, but you don't have a home, then you're deemed a tax resident in Kenya for purposes of those years of income and therefore required to declare taxes. So generally, Alan, the taxation for the people in diaspora would fall into the category of either employment income, which is taxed worldwide, or business income. And business income is you have accrued or derived business income from Kenya. Now, there is a different scenario where you find someone has a business which is partly operating in Kenya and partly operating outside Kenya. Now, our law also requires that that business income ought to be taxed in Kenya. Yes, so generally then the taxes applicable would be taxes on employment income, which mainly we call personal income tax. Then you would have what we call taxes on business, that is corporate income tax, that is if you have a business in Kenya. Or you would also have what we call capital gains tax, that is if you hold any properties in Kenya which you transfer in a year of income, then you'd pay what we call capital gains tax. And I think I had elaborated a lot on the issue of the withholding tax. There is also digital services tax, where then you're trading through any digital platform. And I think basically that's about it. Corporate income tax could also, it's very general, but there are 3 general categories of it. There's the corporate income tax, where you pay 30% of your income at the end of the year, of course paid depending on the provisions of the law in 4 installments. But people with smaller businesses would pay what we call turnover tax, which is a really simplified regime for people with turnovers of between 1 million and 25 million. But there's also what we call monthly rental income. It's also a simplified regime where if you have a property in Kenya and you're earning rental income and you're Kenyan resident, then you can register for the simplified monthly rental income, which you can pay. It has been 10%, but now it's been reduced to 7.5, commencing 1st of January 2024. So that is payable monthly again for people with turnover of less than 15 million for rental income. So those are generally the main tax obligations.